Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to this PhD defense on source separation methods for orchestral music, timbre-informed and score-informed strategies. The PhD student is Marius Miron, and the thesis was supervised by Doctors Emilia Gomez and Jordi Janer. I'm Emmanuel Vincent from INRIA Nancy in France, and I'm the president of the jury. And the jury is also composed of Xavier Serra from Universitat Pompeu Fabra and Maximo Cobos from Universitat de Valencia. Dear candidate, you have about 45 to 60 minutes to present your work.
Okay, thank you for attending my presentation. Okay, so this presentation is about source separation methods for orchestral music. And I'm going to give a brief outline of this presentation. So first I'm going to introduce you to the topic, what is source separation in this context. Then I'm going to talk about the data sets that we've used in our methods. And then the two methods that we propose, the matrix decomposition and deep learning for source separation, and the applications that we did using these methods, and finally the conclusions. Roughly these 6 parts, they correspond to written parts of the thesis. So you can find the part 3 and part 4 are the methods, and part 2 are the data sets. So let's split a bit the title. So what is source separation in this context, and music source separation? So music source separation, as you can see in this figure, assumes recovering the sources in the mixture. And in orchestral music, it's called instrument sitting. So what is a source here? So a source here is comprised of many more instruments. So the violins are a source, the cellos are a source, the double basses are a source. So for me, this is a source, for instance. And as you can see, it's quite complex. So there are a lot of number of sources. They are very similar. So we can say the strings are very similar between themselves. And this results in a complex scenario for music source separation. What are we aiming at here? So basically, if you have a recording of an orchestral concert, you click on a button and you listen to the violins, and you click on a button and you listen to the cellos, and so on. So we want to isolate the sources corresponding to the audio corresponding to the sources in the mixture. And then we move a bit to the case of informed source separation. So what is informed source separation in this scenario? So we want to use side information apart from the audio signal, which can be used to improve source separation. So here, if we have a musical score, we can use it to improve source separation. And if we know the instruments in the score, we can learn their timbres and improve source separation. So here, it's timbre-informed source separation. So this is a short-time Fourier transform magnitude spectra of the 2 notes. So it's a violin and a clarinet. And as you can see, you can visually discriminate, but an algorithm, let's say that it can better distribute the energy between these 2 instruments when it wants to separate between them, just by looking at the relation between the harmonic peaks of these 2 instruments. And the score-informed source separation, so this is a piece in my data set. It's the spectrogram. And in the upper part, you see the spectrogram of the mixture. And with the red, you see the notes for the French horns. So I also plotted the MIDI notes for one of the sources in the mixture. And in the bottom part, you see the spectrogram for the French horn. So we can give it a try and listen to the mixture. So who could hear the French horns? So it's not very obvious here. It's also like a microphone which is in the center of the stage. So it captures better the closest microphone, the big section of violins. It's everywhere. So we can listen now to the French horns. and then again everything together with the horns emphasized. So as you can see, does the score give us? So it gives us basically the time frequency regions where the note of the source is active. So it gives us the onsets, the offsets, and the fundamental frequency, and the harmonic partials if we deal with harmonic instruments. So how can we use this information? So in order to use the musical score, we need to have it aligned with the audio. So this is one of the requirements. This is a big topic in music information research. It's called score following or audio to score alignment, and we rely a lot on this algorithm. And on the other hand, when you have timbres, you want to learn them. So in order to learn the timbres, you need isolated samples for the sources in your mixture. So this is another part which we have. It's called timbre learning. So okay. Let's move to the context in which this thesis was done. So we were participating in the Phoenix project. This was a European project aiming at changing the way the classical music is experienced and transformed. So there was a big collaboration between various European universities and orchestras and institutions. So these are some applications we did from the Phoenix project, and we are mainly interested in score following because we can use this input in source separation, but we also provide audio content for other people, other researchers that can, or companies that can create applications or do a better analysis. So this basically brings us to the motivation of this thesis. So by doing source separation, we somehow recover the audio, the sources, but we create new audio content. So this new audio content can be used to create active music listening applications. And on the other hand, you can do a better analysis for some task using the separated signals. So in the first part, I mean, for orchestral recording, you see this drawing, this is called Orchestra Focus. So you basically are able to click on this instrument view and isolate the sources. This is basically up mixing, so you separate the tracks and for the sources, then you mix it for the virtual reality. You create auditory scene with all the sources again. And then you can somehow simplify an orchestral recording for the people with cochlear implants who prefer this kind of simplified auditory scene. Then you can create, this is what was done, a PhD thesis here. You can create serious games using, based on the conductor metaphor to introduce people to classical music. And on the part of the music analysis, so I mean, you can run the analysis on the mixture, but let's say you want to measure what is the expressiveness of some section in the orchestra. So if you separate that source, and if you run the expressive performance modeling on that source, you can better detect these expressive qualities of a musician or a source or a section. So we are interested in that. Also, this is a big impact for music learning. So people who are studying music, they can listen to a very famous recording or some famous violinist, and they can only listen to that recording. And I think this is important. And also for musicologists, they want to study this. Okay, so going to the challenges. So these are two very famous data sets used in music source separation. DSD-100, it's professionally produced music recordings. And Bach dataset, it's a lot used in score informed source separation because it has these 4 sources, classical music, Bach chorales, and also the score. However, when I started this PhD, there was no dataset that I could use in orchestral recording. So I struggled a bit with this. This is important. Why? Because if we want to evaluate this, you can run a subjective test. So this is expensive. You need to design experiments, to be very careful, to have people that listen to this. So there is also a way to evaluate it in an objective manner. So we wanted that. And yeah, I will address this challenge later. And you can say, yeah, basically we can put a lot of microphone in the concert room, like this was done by the Miners-Mueller's group. So, but this also, you cannot use it in the, to objectively assess the performance of your method, because you still have a lot of leakage between these sections. So this maybe will capture a bit of this as well. And you cannot even use this for these data-driven approaches that need a lot of data, because what you want to do, this basically is your test case, not your training case. So you want to isolate the instruments. So we will also address this challenge. Okay, so another challenge, this is the pitch range of the instruments in the orchestra. With different colors, you see the different sections. So you see there are, as I said before, there are lots of number of sources of similar timbre. And also, there is a lot of overlapping between several sources in different sections. So between this and this, this is very difficult. So according to Juan Jose Bureti's, this leads to less disjoint representation. Disjointment is a measure of how the sources overlap. So if they overlap a lot, they are less disjoint, and they are more difficult to separate. So you have this problem with very harmonic mixtures. Okay, so another challenge is given by the duration of the piece. So when we started this, okay, we were basically running separation for one of these renditions, and it takes like a few hours or a day or something. Here we have the renditions for Beethoven Third Symphony, and all of them are like 50, 60 minutes long. I mean, this doesn't compare with the pop rock music where you have a 3-minute song, you run it and you have the separation right away. So we were also thinking of improving this, making faster source separation in order to collaborate with our partners and not have them wait a lot of days. The opportunities, so obviously in this finished project we had a lot of multi-microphones recordings. However, there is a lot of research in state-of-the-art of closed microphones. This is not the closed microphones, this is a bit different. Why? Because as you can see, if we put a microphone here, it will be basically put from the up and it will stay here. And my source is very dispersed, so it's like a distant microphone scenario, which is it's a bit more tricky as we will see. Again, we have classical music. So these are the renditions of Moonlight Sonata Beethoven. And what they have in common, so they all come from the same score. And basically, how are they're different? So we have this kind of these 4 factors. It's not the only factors that they are different, but we want to focus on tempo. So basically, they can be played slower, faster, louder, softer. They can have different timbres. Some instruments sound different. They are played in different rooms. And you have some local timing. This is like errors or expressive performance. So we want to model these factors to improve source separation. And basically, the tempo is modeled by the alignment. So this basically aligns the score with the audio. This is done by the score following algorithm. So what it does, it warps the symbolic representation to match each note with some sequence in the audio. And what we do here, basically, it's so this alignment is not perfect. So it might have errors, and which are basically errors of the algorithm itself or some expressive performance in the algorithm. So we want to fix these errors. We want to somehow have a better audio to score alignment, and this is basically called note refinement. So we call this method note refinement. It's not. It was done before by Niedermeyer in his PhD thesis, and we have been doing something similar. So we basically want to look at each instrument, at each note, and basically detect the onsets and the offsets. This is the note refinement. And note refinement is what we do in the part 3 of the thesis. So the part 3 we are concerned of improving source separation using this local timing modeling only on this factor. So the other factors are modeled by the baseline method. And in the part 4, on the deep learning part, we are somehow more like modeling these factors jointly. And the other opportunity is it's on the recordings that we had in the Phoenix project. So we uploaded, this is a screenshot from the RepoViz framework. RepoViz is like a multi-model repository in which you can store like video, audio, score, sensory data, and we uploaded basically all the recordings from the Phoenix project there. Also the separation is there. So we had a lot of recordings in which we could test these methods, and they were also included in some prototypes. So we can jump straight into the contributions of this thesis. So first, the knot refinement, as I said before. So I proposed a knot refinement using image processing to fix these errors in alignment. Then a deep learning framework which is targeted at classical music and at those 4 factors. And I also improved this framework using score information. So I have a score-informed source separation for classical music. And again, part of this research is reproducible, so that the data, frameworks, and encoder results are made available, particularly for the deep learning part. We have this orchestral data set with score annotations. And then we have a cloud-based source separation framework in RepoViz. And we have this deep learning repository for audio applications as well in GitHub. So we can go and see the datasets. As I said, there were no orchestral datasets when I started this research. So what I did, there was this dataset by Aalto University. It has like 4 pieces. They are anechoic recordings. So they took each musician and they recorded in an anechoic chamber, and they have 8 or 10 sources per piece. Each of the sources might comprise 12, from 2 to 12 instruments. You might have as much as 39 instruments in one piece, so it's very complex. And what we did here, we annotated 12,000 pairs of onsets and offset. It was a lot of work. And then what we did noisy, because it had some noisy problems, this data set. And the next step was to basically generate a real multi-microphone, not real, but realistic. And we took a model. This is Royal Concertgebouw in Amsterdam. This is a scheme that they provide us for the recording that they did. So this is the instrument sitting, and with the letters, you see the position of the microphones. So we simulate that using the RoomSim software. And here you see basically you give the characteristic of the room, the position of each source and this microphone. And you have to give all these pairs in one configuration, and it generates basically the recordings in each of these microphones. So when we are not using these datasets, we are using the Bach-10 dataset, which was could give us an opinion on how efficient our method easily than just testing on this very complex scenario. And again, we always tested this. This was a part of the deliverables in the Phoenix project. So we besides testing it in an objective manner, we were always testing everything on the Phoenix recordings, which we had on RepoViz. Okay, so we can move to the methods part. So first part of this methods is the third part of the thesis. So we were using source separation using matrix decomposition. And particularly, we use non-negative matrix factorization. So here, what it does, it decomposes the spectrogram in 2 matrices. The timbre bases you see in the left. So these are learned from isolated samples. These are kept fixed during the separation. And on the right side, you see the time game. So, and these ones are initialized with this kind of like piano roll representation, which is given by the score. So basically, what you want to do, where a pitch is active, you put a 1. And where this pitch is not active, you put a 0. So you have each of these red patches are somehow initialized nodes. So how this, it's non-negative matrix factorization. So due to these update rules in this method, what is 0, it stays 0. So what is 1, it evolves according to this factorization method. So basically, the better your time games are initialized, the better your separation. The better your alignment, the better you are giving this score aligned, the better your separation is. In this context, we focused on knot refinement. So we want to have a better alignment. So we want to basically to search for each note and see what restart its onset and offset and improve this alignment, with the goal of improving source separation, of course. And yeah, what we look here, basically, if we are able to somehow restrain this red patch corresponding for this note, then somehow our hypothesis was that we can improve source separation. So again, we go to the gains. So this method requires that you run NMF for a few iterations. So here, I think we use 20 iterations. So you already have you can already do some source separation. But we were thinking, okay, maybe we can do this better. And how? So we were taking each of these rectangles, which corresponds to one note. So basically, we look at this one. And this can be this. So this is one note. And we were using some very simple image processing techniques. So we were binarizing this patch here. This is the binarized version of it. And then we were using some techniques to detect shapes and contours. So we were basically blobs. So this is a blob here. And we associated these entities with the nodes. And what this gives us basically is the onset and the offset of each node. And you can see there is also some sort of vibrator for this as well. I will comment this on this later. And as I said in the NMF, what is 0 stays 0. So if we initialize with this again, basically we don't initialize with everything, but just with this thing here. And this energy, which is 0 here now, will be better distributed to another source. So in this way, we hope of reducing a bit the interferences and improving source separation. So this method was, this was published in a ISMIR paper. We also have another method 1 year before, which is applied to pitch salience. So this is slightly more complex because we don't rely on a matrix factorization to distribute the energy in our timbres. This requires more heuristic and is not as stable as the NMF one. So basically, I think this note refinement can be applied to any kind of like time frequency representation, which has this concept of energy for the sources. About the evaluation, so what we want to look first is if we improve the alignment. So this is a metric that is used in Mirex. It's called the alignment rate. So basically, you have a threshold, and you start with a small threshold. You compute your alignment rate. Of course, it's very bad if you have a very small threshold. And then once you have this error threshold, you increase it, you get better and better. And what we look here, this is the output of the score follower, the onsets and the offsets. And these are the two refinements, the NMF gains with red and the pitch salience with blue. So the red and blue curves are always above the black ones. And this means that we improve somehow the alignment rate for this method. Okay, so let's see the impact on source separation. So we use the BSS eval for the source images. And we have these 4 metrics, which are very standard in evaluating objectively audio source separation. We have the signal to distortion ratio, signal to interference ratio, signal to artifacts ratio, and image to spatial distortion ratio. So let's see how you would do source separation and what do we test here. So I said that each of these patches is then reinitialized again. So basically, we have several ways of playing with this image and several ways of initializing each note. So this is the refined note. And we have basically 6 scenarios. So I'm going to guide you through this, don't worry. So the first part is the A is basically you have a perfectly aligned score. We want to see how good the separation is if you have the perfectly aligned score. Then the misaligned, you have some erroneous or automatically aligned score, which of course might have some errors. Then you want to account for this error. So what people do in state of the art, they just set a tolerance window. And this can be bigger or smaller according to your assumption on how well your alignment does. So if you have a very bad audio score alignment method where your context is very difficult, you might want to set a big window. And then you have D, E, and F, which are my refinement methods. And the difference between E and F is that here we only use the onsets and the offsets. So here we use also this, you see this kind of like sort of vibrato thing, and we have more zeros in this matrix. So the first thing here, I mean, we managed to improve, but somehow the audio to score alignment is very good. So we didn't improve. We improved also on the state of the art, on the ground truth, sorry, because basically what we do, we restrict more this from this. But we also tested in the cases where there were more errors in the alignment, and there we could see much more significant improvement than in this case. So this really works well when you have a lot of errors in the alignment. Okay, so this was tested with Bach 10 in a monaural scenario, and then we wanted to see how it works in these Phoenix and Equality recordings. And this was published in a journal. So what we did, we have a lot of microphones in the hall, and let's say you want to separate trumpet, and the baseline method, what it does, it computes a panning matrix. So the role of this panning matrix is to search for the microphone which is closest to the source. Once we detect this microphone, we compute the gains in these microphones, so in this particular microphone, and then the source is estimated using these gains. And we call this, we call this ref1 because the gains are refined with the previous method only in this channel. So here we will have a better alignment with respect to this channel. And there is an alternative to this. So this is called ref2. And here we can compute the gains in all the channels. So we have some gains estimated in this channel for this source, for the trumpets, and also the trumpets here. And what is our hypothesis here? So we were looking for time frequency regions free of interference. So let's say here and this source, the trumpets might be corrupted by some other source here. And in another microphone, you might have some time frequency bins which were not corrupted by this other source because it's farther away. And in this way, the energy in this gains matrix will somehow evolve better. So we wanted to, this information is used to somehow make these gains in the closest microphones better. And how do we do this? So there is a way to do this with tensor factorization. So we stack everything in 3 valence tensors. And there's another way you can basically take all these gains matrices, you just stack them on the time axis. So you construct a big matrix with all these matrices, and you estimate all of this. And you can hope that you have a better separation in the closest microphone, a better estimation of the gains in the closest microphone. So again, for the evaluation, we look at how we can initialize this. Again, we have the perfectly aligned score. You have some score, some alignment. We have some which has errors, and you account for these errors by just extending this note with a tolerance window. And then you have the refined gains and the refined gains in the multi-channel, the ref1 and the ref2 methods. So looking at the results on the this data set with orchestral recordings, as you can see, we present the results for the 4 pieces, Mozart, Beethoven, Mahler, and Bruckner. The first 2 pieces are from the classical period, the second pieces are from the romantic period. They're slightly more complex, more instruments per source. And as you can see, the more difficult your scenario is, the more sources you have, the more instruments you have per source, the more difficult it is to separate them. So this is basically gives us the distortion ratio. So the more difficult the piece is, also like I was thinking that Mahler is a bit better, but it's actually worse than the Bruckner piece. So yeah, it's very correlated with the complexity of the piece. And again, we look at the refinement. So did we improve over the extended one? So we compared the first 2 ones with the third one. So we could only manage to improve over this very basic baseline in 3 of the 4 cases. In the Mahler piece which is also very complex, was very difficult to to discriminate between these three ways of initializing your gains. And also you can see that there is not much difference between the multi-channel gains refinement and the single-channel gains refinement. So this, what does it tells us? So basically, this tells us that we couldn't find any time frequency bins which are free of interference in other channels that could help a better estimation in the main channel. So again, we were not evaluating source separation in all the channels. We were evaluating only in the closest microphone. So, okay, so we can look at the signal to interference ratio. So what we see here comparing again, this is the ground, so this is almost always the best one, the first one. The second and third, they are better than the fourth one, than the extended version. So what we do with this kind of making the gains sparser, it removes a lot of interference from other instruments. But again, we cannot be perfect, so what it does, it also introduces some artifacts. So the baseline has less artifacts than the refinement. Okay, so we can move to the part 4 of the thesis, which is source separation using deep learning methods. When I started this, there was some work done on singing voice source separation. So what they basically do, you have the spectrogram of the mixture, this X there. You have a time context T, and F are your number of frequency bins. And similar to any deep learning, you feed forward this to a neural network, and you obtain some estimations. And the parameters of this neural network are estimated by minimizing a loss function, which gives you the error between the estimation, the S, and some ground truth data that you have, which are the correct sources. So this means that you need to have training data, and a lot of training data for these methods. And this gives us the advantages and the disadvantages of this deep learning techniques. So basically, the main advantage is that it's faster. So this helps us when we have these large orchestral pieces. Okay, we can use this. Then you have a lot of non-linearities that can better model some very complex functions. And regarding the disadvantages, the training is slow. So you need a GPU, you need a very powerful computers to do the training. And it's also very dependent on the training data. So people do a lot of data augmentation and a lot of techniques to improve training, and obviously a lot of training data. So what we want to do here is to take advantage of the properties of the neural network to speed up training. And we want to address this problem. Like, we want to propose methods to train faster, and we want to address the problem of training data. So we want to propose better training data and to somehow take advantages of the opportunities in classical music. So yeah, this was my baseline method for source separation. This was done in collaboration with British Chandna, his master thesis. This is the architecture that we use. So let me guide you through this. So this is basically, it's auto-encoder. So what does this mean? You have an encoding stage and a decoding stage. So basically, at the decoding stage, you repeat each step. You do the inverse of each step. So you have this, and then you have repeat this, and then this. So you have to do this decoding for each of the sources in the mixture. And at the encoding stage, you have a vertical convolution in frequency, an horizontal convolution. Why do we have this? Because we assume that somehow in audio, compared to image, these two dimensions are not somehow correctly the same. So it makes sense to have this sort of convolution. And it's also faster at the processing time. Then you have this bottleneck, and then you have the dense layer in order to reconstruct this dimension, and the convolution. You obtain some estimation. Then you obtain a softmask, and with the softmask, you multiply it with the spectrum of the input. And this gives you the spectrum of the sources. Again, so we need data to train this. These are the data sets for the other tasks. And we could have trained on the 90% of the songs from the back 10 and test on the 10. But this would mean basically you were overfitting on the same musicians, on the same timbre. And I didn't think that this is very correct. So what I did is, okay, let's totally separate the training and the test data. And we should somehow be able to find better training data. And also like a better testing of this method. So what I did was going basically back to the basics. So again, we have orchestral music, we have the score, we have these factors. We can have many more factors, but we mainly focus on this. So if we have the score, basically all the renditions that we aim at separating will be different in terms of tempos. Some of the renditions will be played louder, some of them will be played softer. I want to separate this piece played in a big Royal Concertgebouw room or a smaller room. So I want to model all of this. Also some errors in the local timing, I want to model this as well. So what we do is we take various combinations of these factors, and we can generate multi-track audio for the isolated instruments. And here we can use this as basically a training data for the neural network method. And how do we do this? So we take the score. This basically, you can do it with various methods. So we tested also with Sibelius. You put the score in Sibelius, you select the library, you select some dynamics, and you synthesize some tracks. You can do it with concatenated synthesis. You can take notes and you just copy, paste them into the audio of various dynamics, timbres. And as another part, we have the audio augmentation. So here, what do? We want to account for these errors in misalignment and also this swing or also some expressive performance. So what we do here, we slightly displace these isolated samples here. So we displace these tracks in order to simulate this real-life scenario. And then we will see how this will impact my results. And you obtain this multi-track audio. And we compute the short time Fourier transform again. We do all this data processing. This is done in comparison to the NMF. This is done on a slice window, so on a time context. So we process basically 300 milliseconds. So this is also some advantage. You feed forward these chunks to the network, and you train your model. And in the real life, you take a piece which is based on the same score that you generated your multi-track audio, and you compute the short time Fourier transform. You do all the data processing for this piece similarly to the training stage, and you feed forward through the network. You obtain a separation. Then you can use the phase of the mixture and the inverse of the short time Fourier transform to construct the audio. So this was published in the SMC conference. So what we wanted to do here, I mean, score here is not explicitly used as an input. So score is only used here, basically. So score is not input in this stage. Score is only used to generate the data. So we wanted to improve this using the score as a direct input here. So how do we do it? So here are some matrices which have the same shape as the magnitude spectrogram. They are constructed basically using the score. So we have a note, we have the onset and the offset, the fundamental frequency. You have a tolerance window. This tolerance window, basically you want to account for vibratos, and this increases with the frequency of the harmonic partials. So this has another note. And we have 4 sources, so we construct these 4 matrices. So basically, this is like some sort of a fine transform computed using the score. So how can we use this to make it a bit better? I mean, we can just apply it, multiply it with the input, but we want to have some sort of a soft attention on the score. It's a very trendy topic in deep learning. And what we did, we compute this softmax by just dividing each of these K matrices with their sum. And then we can use this soft masks. We can multiply it with the input. And then you have this scored filter spectrogram corresponding to each source. So how can we use this as an input? So it seems like we can take advantage of the properties of the neural network. So basically, this is local connectivity and parameter sharing. So what does this mean? When you have an image processing technique using neural networks, the filters will actuate on the same RGB channels. So in the same manner, we use the 4 sources corresponding to the 4 instruments are as RGB channels as input in our network. So in this case, as you can see, in comparison to the other case, we don't need to deconvolve 4 times. So in the previous case, we repeated this 4 times. But here, we only do it once because when you have done this step here, this gives us already 4 channels as input. And again, you do the softmax, you multiply with the input, and you get the spectrograms of the sources. So this is fairly standard. And OK, the evaluation. So we've done this with BAC10 dataset, this BAC for us dataset. And we have two methods. So we have this CNN autoencoder, this one, which is score-informed. It's trained on rendition synthesized with RWC. And then you have the NMF, which we presented in part 3 of the thesis. So here also you have timbre basis trained with the RWC. It's also score-informed, so the gains, as we've seen, it's initialized with the score. So regarding the score, you might have a perfectly aligned score, as we've seen also in the part 3. And also you can have some automatic score follower that gives you some alignment which have errors. And to account for these errors, you put this tolerance window. So we are doing the same things as we did in part 3. And these are the results. So this is signal to this, SDR, SAR, and SAR. This was published in an ISMIR paper. So what are we looking at here? So we compare basically the CNN using the score follower, this one, and the CNN using the perfect alignment. So we see that they're quite the same. So we are somehow, basically, I think mostly because of this augmentation that we are doing on the time axis, we are able to recover these errors in alignment. However, this is not true for the NMF, as we've seen also in the other part of the thesis. So in the NMF, due to these gains and because what is 0 stays 0, the better your alignment, the better your separation is, at least for this data set. So in this sense, the CNN is slightly better than the NMF. So in this case where we don't have I mean, this is the ideal case. You will never have a perfect alignment in real life. So when we don't have it, CNN is better. And basically this is seen also in the signal to interference ratio. So we have less interference in this method in compared to the NMF baseline. OK, so the other problem we had, training took a lot of time. So, I mean, how many renditions we can generate? At the beginning, I generated like 4,000 renditions. So this was taking too much. So what I did was like, OK, let's see what is the correlation between the performance and the number of renditions you have for training. So you have here 80 renditions. You don't use 4,000, but you use 80. And these 80 renditions are the same renditions that you're going to use for all your training. And of course, as previous research proved, that the less renditions you have, the worse is your training. So this means that the training drops. The performance drops if you have less renditions. So what we can do, we can sample. You can have different renditions at each epoch. So you have the first epoch, and somehow minimize your function with 50 renditions. You have the second epoch, your loss function goes down, but with another 50 renditions. So what we have here, it's a very noisy loss function. And this somehow speeds training a lot, and it helps it converge a bit faster. So this is called bootstrapping with replacement. And I'm thankful to the ISMIR reviewer that pointed me to this method. That this was published in an ISMIR paper. So regarding to the applications, How can we use the output of these methods? So first, this was a requirement of the Phoenix project. Basically, we have implemented the cloud-based source separation. So anyone can have this multi-track recording of an orchestra with the aligned score. It can upload this through this data pack design into the repo server. And then we offer it, the separated recordings of this multi-track recording. And anyone can access this through the RepoVis website or through the API. So this was very helpful because then we could collaborate with the partners. And this was done by a partner of the project. This is the iPad app, which has also like the concert notes and the score following. And if you click on another section of the app, you have this instrument view. So, and this gives us basically what we call it Orchestral Focus. Why? Because you click on this source and you only hear the audio for this source. So let's see this demo now. Oh, sorry. Okay, so this is another demo that we did. So basically, this is related to changing the viewpoints, to recreating the experience of the classical musical concert. And this is a virtual reality concert created with We Make VR company from Amsterdam. And we provided the separate audio. They had some cameras in the Berliner Philharmoniker, and we created this VR demo. So I'm going to try to play it here. So I don't know, this works amazingly on the headphones, but here maybe only the people who are sitting in the center of the room will be able to hear the effect. Oh, sorry. So the idea is like you move and you basically hear certain instruments according to where you move. So okay. These were the demos. We can go to the conclusion part. And again, I'm going to restate the contributions. So first, this Phoenix anechoic database that we annotated this and denoised these recordings. We also specialize them using RoomSim. And this can be used to other tasks, not just to source separation, like instrument recognition, transcription on orchestral recording. So I hope that this is going to be used further on. Then we have the other recordings in the Phoenix project. So we have applied our methods to real life situations, and we have this online, and anyone can access this and listen. We have this note refinement using image processing techniques. Then we propose this gains refinement in this multi-channel scenario, and this using this parallel factor analysis method. And again, for the deep learning part, we proposed a way to generate better training data and a way to speed up training. And again, we had the score-informed source separation for deep learning, which was quite novel when it was published. Regarding the reproducible research, so this is mostly for the second part, the deep learning, the deep learning part. The NMF part it can be accessed to the RepoVis API. But deep learning, it's on GitHub. It's quite popular now. We published the wave files, the separated wave files, and the evaluation done with BSS eval on Zenodo, so anyone can reproduce our research using this data. We invested a lot of effort into this. Again, I had a lot of nice emails from people. So an email from BBC that wanted to use this method, and someone wanted to use the GitHub repository for other source separation tasks. Actually, we use this repository for hip-hop source separation, for professionally produced music, for binaural source separation. We had someone messaging me regarding the note refinement, and particularly detecting the offset, which was not quite done by anyone. Then I had like random messages from the people in Reddit wanted to use this in vocal source separation, and they were not really happy with the Python running Python code. So we still have to move a bit further away from that to help the people that want to use this. This journal article on multi-track source separation of orchestral recording has some media coverage. So this is a news from Antena 3, is a Spanish news website and TV, I think. And there were also some other news in the Spanish, Catalan, and Romanian media. And as the future works, so we can use this deep concept in other tasks. One of them, I think it can be instrument recognition. You can have better somehow training data. So we were using RWC, but we can use NSYN to generate training data for this method. And we can maybe take advantage of this the fact that we have the score, and we can explore other music traditions like jazz or any kind of music tradition that has this kind of like score representation to test this method in other situations. Publications, so you see the first three are from the part 3 of the thesis, the NMF one, the matrix factorization one, and then the other ones are from the deep learning one. So, okay, that was it. Thank you.
Thank you. It will now be time for Maximo Cobos to ask questions.
Thank you very much. Well, Marius, first of all, I would like to thank you for your presentation. I think it has been very clear that you have summarized quite well the work that you presented in this document on the thesis. Congratulations not only to you, also to your supervisors. And in fact, I think that the topic that you addressed is a very challenging one. Okay, it is true that most of the research work in source separation so far has been focused on modern music, and that's actually an easier scenario than the one that you have centered your research. And probably orchestral music is one of the most difficult ones, I can think. So, I mean, you summarize that very well in your document due to all the inconveniences in terms of number of sources, the reverberation that you have, overlapping harmonics. I mean, many different things are quite difficult in that scenario, right? I enjoyed a lot reading the thesis. You address several problems within your contributions, the to score alignment, the creation of the properly annotated data sets, alternatives for source separation using different frameworks, the NMF, the deep learning, and so on. So I think that the thesis is very complete in scope, and you have done a good job. And I have here some comments that I noted down while reading your document. So I hope we can discuss a bit. First, in the introduction, you state that when talking about the orchestral music scenario, you say that since in such complex cases, perceptual cues are not enough to discriminate between the sources, orchestral music is the perfect test bed for informed source separation. What do you mean when you say that perceptual cues are not enough? I mean, don't you think that cues such as spectral smoothness or common amplitude modulation, all these things, don't you think they're not enough for separating orchestral music?
So yeah, there are two aspects here. So there is the first aspect, which was discussed by Stouter and David Huron. So they did experiments on how many sources you can perceive in audio simultaneously. So if you have, as you can see, you couldn't hear the horns, the French horns. So in this case, somehow we are going above the perception level using the score information. Because why? Because there is a table in the thesis in the page 31, I think. So here you have some state-of-the-art methods which use and the prior information that you use, and you discover that the ones which are weakly informed, they use these perceptual cues. However, we cannot rely so much on these perceptual cues when we are doing source separation in orchestral music. So, for instance, there is a method called repet, which relies on the fact that the background is repeating and the voice is not. So hence you can separate the. So we are not. So when I had in mind this kind of perceptual cues, not amplitude modulation or other things. So I'm discussing it in relation to the state of the art of these methods.
Okay, thank you. Now my next question is about the Phoenix dataset. Although originally it seems that the anechoic recordings are provided independently for each instrument, right? In the dataset from the Finland, the Finnish people. You merge instruments of the same class into a single track, right?
Yeah.
So then, for your multi-microphone setup, you spatialize synthetically these tracks, right? And from my point of view, it seems that by doing so, some of the acoustic interactions between instruments pertaining to the same group are too much simplified, since they are assumed to be playing from a single spatial location. So have you performed any experiment to validate that this simplification would hold in practice?
No, actually, this is a very good point. It was also addressed by Emmanuel. Of course, it's a simplification of the real SF now. So this simplification was done at the beginning because creating a room simulation with 37 instruments was very difficult. I could somehow automatize this, so maybe I could leave this as a featureware, but also again, on the evaluation side, you need to convolve the impulse responses, all those 37, and then sum them, so this is very computation intensive. It's a simplification that basically allows us to focus on other aspects of source separation. So mainly the number of sources per instrument. So of course, it's more difficult, so we expect a decrease in performance. But this decrease in performance might as well somehow draw all the methods through a baseline that everything is so bad that you cannot tell a difference between what you propose. So it was happening the same in the piece of Mahler. The piece was so complex that you could not see that the refinement was working or not. So when you are performing this kind of experiment, you want somehow a control scenario. You want ecological validity. You want to be as close as you want to the real life scenario. But somehow you want to control some of the factors. You don't want to vary something. So we could tell that, okay, the performance is dropping because you have more sources per instrument. You have more instruments within a source. So yeah, I mean, this is a fairly good point. It's an approximation of the, and I modified the thesis.
Yeah, but I understand it's a quite difficult problem. So it's fine. Also, for this data set, you use the RoomSim toolbox, as you commented. You've done this by trying to somehow resemble this Royal Consort cabal. But since RoomSim only simulates shoebox-shaped rooms, right? Approximating a real concert hall sets, that one is quite difficult.
Yeah.
In fact, according to Wikipedia, that hall has 2.8 seconds of reversion time, and you get result 1 second or so.
I tried with 2.6, and it was nothing was working.
My point is fair to do that simulation for research purposes and so on, but didn't you try to say, okay, I'm going to try to create a more realistic simulation by using a more sophisticated
what I did, so if you look at the so there is a table here in the spatialization with the absorption coefficients.
Yes.
So I somehow tried to take the absorption coefficient for the X range to be that the same to a room that has some cloth, and then the walls had some draping. So I was thinking to make it a bit more realistic, not to have a very dry room, but something that it's acoustically plausible. Of course, when I increase the reverberation time, this means that in score-informed source separation, you also have to increase the alignment, and the tail is very big. Yeah. And this means you lose a lot of performance in your area, but you lose it because you have an interference from other instruments in the tail, which has less energy. So again, this is a simplification because otherwise nothing would have worked.
Yeah, it would be interesting anyway. I mean, but you need a 3D model and so on. But now that you're doing the effort for creating a realistic data set, maybe it is worth also to consider that aspect. Also, it seems that the Phoenix data set is only used throughout your thesis when you're evaluating the multi-microphone score-informed NMF algorithm. The rest of the thesis seems that use the back.
Yeah, I have that. So I've been working. So this didn't make it in time to be published in the thesis. I prepared this actually. This is.
I was wondering why in the deep learning part you didn't show any.
Yeah, I mean I also didn't have time to explain this method. So this is multi-channel source separation using deep learning. You have separation in each one of the single channels. And this is the NMF from the. So when you have the multi-channel source separation, you improve over the NMF. But if you separate in each channel separately, if you take each microphone as a separate source separation problem, this doesn't improve in relation to the NMF. But this improves, like you separate in all the channels. And here I evaluated the source images in all the channels jointly. So this was very intense. I think I crushed a few computers here at the UPF because when I tried to evaluate this. It's like 30 gigabytes of memory per 30 seconds of audio. So I evaluated for all these cases during a few months. So I did this effort, but I didn't. I'm writing a journal now for this. So yeah.
Last question related to the data sets. Are the real orchestral recordings from the Phoenix actually used at any point of the thesis? The real ones. Because when you comment on the data sets, there's a point where you describe real orchestral recordings where you don't have a ground truth of the separated sources.
Yeah, we have done the separation for all these recordings, and you can find. I have a link here, so it's at the page 84. There is a link with some demos that we did, and you can also access the separation of these tracks. And if you search on RepoVis, on the data packs Phoenix, you have a lot of data packs which have the separation for the audio. So this was done, the separation was done using this multi-channel NMF, not deep learning. Because the Phoenix project basically ended when I started the deep learning.
For evaluating the source separation performance, you use the BSS eval measures. While you mentioned the PAS measures as well in the introduction, which are assumed to give a more perceptual related result. Why is that you don't use these measures throughout the thesis? You present them, but you decide not to use them.
Yeah, it was so it was very so as I said, using this perceptual test it is very expensive. So at some point we decided to run some experiment, but we didn't have a clear experimental design. I mean, you usually present in source separation. The previous experiments had like 2 or 4 sources, and here we had more sources. And how long should the test be? Which part of the mixture and the songs you should take, considering that in orchestral music, and I didn't talk a lot about this, some sources are silent for a period of time. So not all of them. So yeah, it was like more or less I think we need somehow a shift in the experimental design. And it's true, like now there are some papers that claim that not always the BSS eval measure correlate with the perceptual evaluation. So I think, yeah, this is probably in this journal paper we'll run some experiments comparing NMF and deep learning from the perceptual point of view.
Okay. In page 56, when you are introducing DNNs, you say that the learning happens according to the cost function, which contains a distance between the noise or estimated source magnitude spectrogram and the target spectrogram, like the reconstruction error E in equation 213. That equation is the divergence equation that guides the NMF learning problem. My observation is that this equation makes clear the non-negativity constraints of NMF. So are anyhow the deep learning architectures you are using forced to provide a non-negative output as in NMF?
So the estimation of the
the final outputs, the outputs from the final layer.
So the final layer, it's basically this was done before me by Po and Huang. The final layer, it's the soft mass layer. So this is integrated into the neural network. It's fully deterministic. So the output will be the spectrogram of the sources, which are positive. There is some research by Paris Maragdis and his PhD student, I think Srikant Bentakami, done on how we can somehow create a model of the deep learning of convolutional neural networks using the same logic as the NMF. So your filters, in this case, you make them non-negative. So you have, as we had, like time filters, but these are non-negative.
That's what I was thinking.
So there is some work done on that. This was published last year. But we are not enforcing that. We have ReLU non-negativities, ReLU non-linearities, and this means that the output of your layers are positive. So
also regarding this, the deep learning solutions that you present, all take as input signals, signals in the time frequency domain. And although it seems that using spectrograms as input for a neural network is the common choice, other recent work such as the SoundNet CNN for recognizing sound events and so on also use the raw audio input. Do you think that using raw audio signals as inputs could also work for source separation?
For it's in this very complex scenario where you need a lot of side information, so beside the audio signal, to guide your source separation, maybe not. So maybe if there is a way you can somehow use the score to improve this this method, yes, but I don't see this how in a very non-sparse representation as the one that use raw audio. So my goals were to use very sparse things or make them sparser.
Yeah. In fact, in the line of this last question, it seems that throughout your experiments you always use the same window length and hop size. And have you evaluated the impact of the selected time frequency representation in the separation? I mean, besides hop size and window length, you also may have gamma tone filter banks and so on.
I evaluated the window. So when we did experiments using the DSD100 dataset, the pop rock music, it was better to use a Hanning window because then you have more percussive sounds and also some audio effects, and in the orchestral music and classical music, scoring from source separation, you have harmonic sounds. So here we use a Blackman-Harris window. This was focusing more on the harmonics and better to isolate. When we use the same window on professionally produced music, I don't know if Gerard is here, so he had like lots of artifacts using the same window. And again, the window size you can use if you have more percussive onsets, you can use a smaller hop size. But this means your time context, you have more parameters to model. You have to estimate more frames, actually.
Sure. I missed some comparisons with other state-of-the-art methods. I mean, most of the results compare with variations with respect to different alternatives that you propose. But I have not seen comparisons with other baseline separation approaches, others from the one that you are built on top of that, okay? So in fact, it would be straightforward comparison, just consider the ideally separated sources from the optimal binary masks by having a perfect knowledge of those sources. Why haven't you done that? So
basically, I emailed several people and I asked if they want to apply this to source separation to have like a fair comparison with their methods. So there is again in the page 31 in this table you have the method by Traslich and using these kernels for source separation. It's not score informed, and yeah, I somehow stopped in the middle. The communication at some point stopped, so it was a pity we could not evaluate his method on this data set which I proposed.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, you try to estimate the best softmax possible for separation. So
yeah,
you know which are the optimal softmax.
Yeah, so what I did is for the NMF, I tried to find some sort of framework that has this time frequency representation, like the gains, and try to improve this on the baseline. My baseline is this framework. I also I've worked with some extension of the multi-source filter model, of the source filter model of the Rio. And I mean, this kind of, if you talk about knot refinement, this can be applied to any kind of like matrix factorization that has this kind of gain concept. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's true. We haven't. I wish I could have evaluated more with
time for
yeah.
everything. I understand as well. Well, I must say also that some results have been a bit difficult to follow at times because the way you have presented them, especially when writing the captions of the figures. For example, figure 4.7, you can look for it, presents results for the pitch salience-based refinement method. But the caption does not clearly specify that the figure refers to that method. Moreover, if you look at the legend of that graph, it is not clear that the red lines corresponds to the pitch salience method and the blue lines to the output of Carabia's method.
Okay.
So it's a bit difficult to follow. Just if you just want to take a look at the result. Sometimes you specify is the result from the method described in section 2.11, and you have to go back to section 2.11 to see that it is the pitch salience-based method. So it was a bit inconvenient. Okay. Let's see. Also, the Hanning matrix that you use in the multi-microphone NMF is a scalar matrix. This might be like assuming that the acoustic path between sources and microphones consists only of a gain term, right?
Yeah.
And any idea about how to consider some I don't know, frequency-dependent matrix so that the acoustic transfer function of the model is a bit more realistic?
I think if I would start now to do this method, I use probably the phase invariant model that Emmanuel has done. So this, I think, is more robust at estimating sources in a multi-microphone scenario. So I think this is a better alternative than the spanning matrix. And this was, I don't know, when it was published, 2010, the first time. So yeah, I didn't know that. If I would start now my PhD, probably I would use this kind of method to estimate. It's much more robust. And you can see it in the CSEC evaluation.
I think this is my last question. In page 178, you say that additionally, various methods were tested and were not proven to improve the separation, such as CNN architectures, having separate filters for each source, right? And I imagine that having dependent filters for the sources in the CNN would increase also parameters to be learned.
Yep.
And are you sure that that didn't work because it was a problem of insufficient training data? Or just it didn't work, having separate filters?
I think it didn't help in this case. So I think with maybe under Paris Maragdi's new method of just restricting these filters to look like timbre bases in an MF, having these filters for each source would work. But in this case, the loss function is approximated for your training data. So yeah, it's true that okay, this didn't work because your training data was like this. But I think I created very somehow plausible scenarios. So what I did, I basically compared this with with basically having 4 paths for 4 instruments. You have 4 set of filters, and you use these filters to deconvolve. And basically, if this didn't work, and the parsimony rule in science tells you that if something doesn't work and it overcomplicates your problem, don't use it. So I didn't use this. It was simpler to use the simpler architecture.
Okay. I lied. I have one more question. This is my last one. Okay. Truly my last one. It has to do with the localization results that you present in one of the latest sections. You didn't even mention here in the presentation, right? So I guess that it seems that it's just a preliminary experiment that you have done in the thesis. Because you don't even present results regarding localization on accuracy for different setups, parameters, and so on. So is there an intention to continue the work on that line, or was this just a simple experiment to...
Yeah, this was a simple experiment run with Bach 10 data set, 4 sources. And we discovered, it was like a requirement from the Phoenix project to have this, and we also tested the SRP FAT method. This was, I thought that my note refinement, since you can refine your notes with respect to each channel, then you can somehow follow the TD-OA. Yeah. But I tried to put reverb in this model, and it was a mess. So I think this, I didn't put it as a method. I don't think it's robust enough to work with this model in a real life situation. So it was only some preliminary response. We ran some evaluation in a simple case. We put reverb, it didn't work. So I think it was not a path to pursue.
That's all. Thank you very much. Congratulations again.
Thank you. And now Xavier Serra will ask more questions.
Okay. Again, thank you very much for the presentation and the thesis. I am definitely not in the area of source separation, and the thesis has been very good for me as an introduction to many of the things. And it really goes into, I guess, covering quite a bit of what the methodologies are, and it's well written and it's quite instructive. So that was good. Of course, it's excellent. All the part on reproducibility. That's something that here in the department we are very much promoting in the last few years. And you got also this Maria de Maestro award, and definitely it's a very important thing. And in fact, I believe your software, your repository has been very relevant, and I think it can be very good for many people to start on this topic and be able to work on that. So I think that's a very, very important contribution of your work. Of course, your thesis that I guess, I don't know how many years, when did you start your thesis? How many years ago?
4 years ago.
4 years ago? Okay, well, that's pretty good. But clearly you have had to, I'm sure, from the original ideas, and that's something that in the document is not apparent normally. But of course, you had to change quite a bit your aim, goals, methodologies through this time, and had to adapt, and especially all this deep learning thing that I'm sure you didn't sort of were not planning to work on.
No, actually, in my proposal, I was planning to work. It was only deep learning.
Okay.
But
and then what happened?
And then I started to work on the multi-source filter model of Durio, and then I met Julio. So he had already this framework doing source separation. So I tried to improve on that. This also gave me the opportunity to learn this method. I never worked with NMF. Okay. So this was state of the art back then.
So it was not that you started with NMF and then you changed to deep learning, it was the other way around?
No, deep learning, so I developed this framework, the deep concept on GitHub when I was in Linz. So you can only focus on a limited number of things. So I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Maybe let me just ask a few things. Again, since I'm not an expert, it's going to be kind of general things. But clearly, the first one for me is always try to identify what are the things to focus on that would improve the state of the art. Okay, and again, I found some missing things in the thesis, and related it also with Maximo said about the comparison with other techniques. So then it's hard to sort of figure out what things have you built on top of that, because the comparisons is, so maybe just to continue on that question. So the first thing is, like for example, you didn't participate in any challenges. I mean, because one thing is that no one has maybe worked on scoring for classical music in the way you do, so that's difficult to apply other techniques, and they haven't run it. But you could have done the opposite. You could have kind of applied your type of methods in more existing challenges or existing.
We did submit something for CSEC last year, and it was British work on. Basically, CNN source separation, deep learning source separation. So we submitted this method. So it was not the best one, it was not the worst one. I don't know. But my focus here was to use particular things for classical music. I tried to propose this year. I was in contact with someone from Iran to propose a new task. But there was not enough interest from people to join this task, so I think I didn't get any reply. The only thing that I could have done better is to basically invest more time in implementing some state-of-the-art method. There was not a lot of code online that I could use. So I could basically take another NMF model and adapt it to this. It requires a lot of effort.
But for example, it's clearly that if your idea was to really focus on deep learning, and you have done some good work on that, I think from day one you would have realized that the big problem is the data sets, no? The access to large data sets.
Yeah.
And the data sets that come out of Phoenix, I don't think they are big enough or appropriate enough for kind of a full-fledged deep learning type of approach. So, and it's clear, and I don't, well, maybe you didn't mention it too much, and it's just not clear. For me, it's clear that the synthetic approach is the right way, because that's the only one that would allow you to get large data sets. So exactly what did you do and how big? Because I have the feeling that it's not, in this type, at the current state of the art, the quality of the sound is not that important. I mean, if you just have a lot of data, you have the scores and you have renditions of the scores, and now there are good synthesizers that, of course, they are not expressive, so maybe for listening, they are not that relevant, but for training, definitely they could be very relevant. And you did some, but it was not clear for me how big, what size, what it covers.
Well, I'm going to talk about basically the deep learning for the orchestra part, which was not published in this thesis. The Phoenix recording, they cannot be used for training. They have leakage from the other instruments in one microphone, so they cannot be used for training these data-driven methods. And with this sampling method, so we discovered that you could have as much as 20 renditions each epoch. So you can train, basically you can start from a score, you can synthesize 20 variations of the score, and you can train on that, and you can obtain feasible source separation. So also the truth is, like, my pieces in the Phoenix dataset, they were not 50 minutes long. So in this case, generating 50 minutes long pieces gives you a lot of training data. So in this case, with this approach of generating training data, how big is your data is not a problem. You can generate an infinite number. The problem is, like, it takes a lot of time to train. And how can we speed up training? This was my my research goal there.
So which you didn't talk much about that. I mean, supposedly you took advantage of the infrastructure of the department,
yeah.
GPUs and things like this. So
this is described in the there is a section, and somewhere in the conclusion it's called let me see, I think it's a computational constraint or something. So let me see, where is this? So I described this there. The conclusions should be something like this. Yeah, it's technical challenges at page 239. 239.
Yes, right. Yeah.
So.
But you don't describe fully all the infrastructure that you had, and.
It's described in all the papers. So I say I'm using Tesla, the Tesla, NVIDIA GPU cards, and how long the training took,
okay.
Yeah, and how long the separation takes.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, so it could have been good maybe to get a little bit more detail and about the size
Yeah.
of the synthetic data, and basically also for the people that will come after you, so that because at the end I think everyone ends up with the same problem, and if people can prepare for that and know how to generate this data. And one big thing that I have missed sincerely is to listen to the results. So there is this video that you showed, but because clearly the type of applications that you presented, and maybe these are they all imply kind of listening. No, I mean there is so you didn't create the collection of examples of full collection of
only for the NMF. So only for the NMF we have tested this with the Phoenix project. So all the demos are online and in the applications. With the deep learning, I put some videos online which are done for the Izmir SMC conferences. So these are some demos which I created for the conferences, for the presentations. So.
But what is your feeling? Because you don't have qualitative evaluation of these results. So talk a little bit about, compared even with the state of the art that, again, I haven't heard. So what is your feeling of the perceptual quality of this source separation?
So when this is clearly reflected into the results, so the CNN ones has less interferences, but it has more artifacts. So it basically separates more at the expense of having more artifacts in comparison to the NMF. In NMF, the separation between the sources is not very clear, and because of the baseline method that uses this kind of like log frequency representation, there are a lot of artifacts in the high frequencies. In the NMF, you don't have this that much. So these are my, when I listen to this, I realized this. Mm-hmm. Also, Jordi, I think he asked some sound engineers what is their opinion on this, and we also had some feedback with them. Basically, at some point we decided how can, when remixing again, what is the level of the mixture that you can put on? So how can you mix them that these artifacts are not audible enough? So of course, the better your separation, the less you have to add from the mixture. So yeah, in the NMF I think we had like 6 dB. We put the mixture 6 dB lower and the source 6 dB higher to create this instrument emphasis demo.
Mm-hmm. Which, of course, this relates with what do you define by sources? And I mean, I think clearly musicologists would not agree with what you mentioned.
No, a source can be a vibrating string, or in a piano, it's one.
Correct.
I don't know.
Or for example,
one hand in the piano.
It's not a timbre bass because every section has a division, had many instruments playing different melodies. All the winds would have specific melodies for every. The violins would have for sure 2 and sometimes 4. So timbre in form cannot help you much because there is a lot of different sources for every timbre.
Yeah, in this case, the score information is very important.
Correct. That's right. Yeah.
It gives you the possibility to isolate, to focus on.
And then that's why the quality of the source separation will vary drastically depending on what type of source it is and how.
I described this also in there is this tentative musicology part of the thesis. So there is this way of sounding louder for some sources. Of course, the horns, the physical properties of the instrument of this can give you this amount of range, and they usually play louder. So, of course, the separation will work better for the violins. It always works better for the violins because there's like maybe 10, 20 violins in this source. Mm-hmm. So if you have 2 bassoons, sometimes it just overlaps on the other source.
But the bassoon, if it's it's a single instrument, and the violin.
Yeah, there are like 20. So.
But at the same time.
Also, there is one thing which I haven't mentioned. There, like this Phoenix anechoic, we could originally this has violins 1 and violins 2. We simplified again this, but in the finished recordings, we have violins 1 and 2 at 2 separate sources. So in the finished recording, we consider this German sitting versus the American sitting. And the separation works. Why? Because we have the score. The score is very important here. Basically, it's the same source having the same instrument having the same timbre but playing 2 different things. So we could separate them only using the score here.
By the way, the little demo that you played, the video, that was NMF. That was not the.
Yeah. If you check the papers, I think I also have in the thesis. There are some. In the papers I put some YouTube videos of the deep learning method.
Okay. And then about the applications, you mentioned that it was not clear for me. One is the one you showed, and the other is that you mentioned these repo bees, and I don't know if it's that clear. So the idea is that you have a service with an API that if you upload recording and the score, you are able to get the
Yeah, so this is how we did the source separation. The architecture is described in the applications. So basically there is a server, which is the web interface, and there is a server, we call it the Phoenix source separation server. So you upload this data set, then this trigger a process on this server. It takes the database and it does the source separation on the cloud. And then at some point when it's done, you can access your source separation through repo.vis. So this was also a requirement of the Phoenix project, and it's implemented because it was there. So we really had to do this. And also it was a nice idea. I mean, what the problem with this, like all the repo.vis interface is quite difficult to use with this data pack, this designer. You need to put your tracks in a certain, then the scores as well. We need to have the score. We don't provide the alignment by this. We need to have the score aligned before.
And yeah, maybe to finish, I don't have much more time, but if you had to start again from scratch, and you had all the information that you have now, and you were requested as part of repo.vis, I really want to get the best source separation for orchestral music with the traditional, let's say, romantic, classical repertoire. What would you do now? And you had sort of a funding like Phoenix, so that means that you could invest on certain development and manpower to do certain things. What would you do?
Yeah, I learned a lot. So of course, I would first start with the data set. So the data set is things that was done only in my second year, at the end of my second year of PhD. So I would start first with this. Then I'll probably build like a framework which has like a flow of input and output, a very baseline. And then probably now there is a lot more code from the state of the art, which you can find online. This was not true in 2013. So there is a NASL now that has a lot of implementation of the source separation method. It has also this phase invariant method implemented there. So I could have taken this and put it in my framework and have more comparison with the state of the art on this, and also a way to evaluate it in a joint manner in the same framework. So this is what I would have done. But first start with the data set, of course.
Because just to finalize, so with what is the current state of the art, and that means yours plus the kind of things you know, what is your feeling of the usefulness or the practical applications in terms of the current techniques? What can we do? What can if a company like all these now, people look at the software that you have, and typically they send you an email. I want to have this recording, and I want to get the parts. No, so what is really so what would you respond? Would you tell him, no, forget it, you cannot do that, you cannot do source separation of orchestral? What is your feeling of the reality of the practical usage?
Yeah, so we did this in the Phoenix project. So basically the source separation is integrated into this prototype. This means that they sell a concert recording.
That was a very much tuned to a particular set of pieces, no? In general, is that?
No, I mean, this was done for the Royal Concertgebouw. Then it was the VR demo for the Berliner Philharmoniker.
And that was with the NMF. So with
yeah.
the NMF.
And of course, you cannot do all this with deep learning again, and it's much faster now. So well, I don't know. Maybe if someone requires me to train something for a piece, it's very efficient if I can separate this piece over and over again. If I do this training just once, then maybe it's not efficient because training takes a lot of time. But if I separate many renditions of the same piece, I can. This is very efficient to do it with deep learning. Again, there is a lot of every month there is a new method on source separation with deep learning. So obviously, things are moving very fast in this direction.
So you believe that in a few years?
There is not much interest and probably not a lot of money into orchestral source separation. I think only the BBC was interested in this. And these orchestras, I don't know if they have a lot of money to, like the RCO had from the European project, to invest in this kind of apps and the RCO editions, as they call them. They basically sell a software like a record, like a CD. They don't sell a CD, they sell the iPad app with the recording. So you need a lot of money to do that, to pay the software companies and this. There is a lot of more work done also by some startups in professionally produced music. Basically, you have 4 sources, and it's much easier not much easier, but it's a different scenario.
Okay, thank you very much, and congratulations again for the good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I would also like to congratulate you for the good work. I appreciated that it was a challenging problem that few people or almost nobody had tackled before, and you pushed the work until it could be demonstrated in real scenarios with companies, and I think it's quite rare when you tackle a really new problem to go so far. So congratulations for this. I also have a series of questions, starting with NMF. So before that, I should mention I sent some comments to you. You corrected the thesis. Unfortunately, I could not read the corrected version so far, so please forgive me if I ask the same questions again. So my first question relates to the harmonic NMF model. Since you were training on isolated data from each source and even from each node, I was wondering how important it is to enforce this harmonicity constraint, and maybe whether this is an appropriate constraint given that some sounds, such as the onsets of notes, are not harmonic.
Yeah, we had this problem in the, so we, again, in the original Phoenix anechoic data set, the auto-anechoic, there are also Timpani.
Mm-hmm.
In the, which is basically, it doesn't have a harmonic structure. We basically excluded this instrument so we can focus on separation between the harmonic instruments. Okay. When dealing with Timpani, of course I could have modeled this with deep learning easier than with the NMF. It requires an additional learning stage that basically you don't enforce harmonicity with for this particular source. You find the samples in the RWC database, mm-hmm. and then you have basically in your NMF model, you don't enforce harmonicity for the pitches of yes. of this source. This is what we did in the Phoenix demo. So we have recordings in which we separated Timpani, and we have set like a harmonics, a structure of the timbre, how it can look for this instrument, okay. And we kept that fixed. However, it was not perfect, so because we didn't have a proper learning stage for this, yeah. But
okay, so I understand for Timpani, you don't want this constraint. And for instruments which are harmonic, does it make a difference to enforce the constraint?
There is some work done on that.
Uh-huh.
I think by Romain Hanekin, which has like different kind of, so instead of having a timbre model on your note, you have timbre model for the attack of the note, for the decay of note and the tail. So maybe this could have improved source separation. So one of my regrets is that I didn't try something similar. This was also pointed out by one of the reviewers of the Ismir paper.
Okay. Okay.
So I'm aware of that.
Okay.
But anyway, this is like this is why we didn't use the. If you see the training for the NMF, it considers 1 pitch per note. So and the separation has 4 pitches per note. So you have more resolution. Why? Because in the training stage you average your timbre for all the notes. So you average the attack, decay, and you have it in 1 timbre.
Okay. All right. Yes, so another question on a similar line. I mean, as you said, there was 1 timbre per note. And in this orchestral scenario, because several instruments are playing the same note, you have some constructive or destructive interference issues that change the timbre of the note more than if there was just a single instrument playing this. So do you have an idea, I mean, in a sense, how much it changes if you had multiple timbres per note for a single instrument? How many more would you need to model this orchestral scenario similarly well?
Okay, yeah, so basically there was, first of all, there was a problem with these recordings. I mean, as much as realistic as they were still recorded in an anechoic room, so they were the same musician playing over and over again. There's some synchronization issues, which already give you some artifacts, okay, as you mentioned. I haven't tried this thing of having basically different kind of bases. This will be, as you mentioned in your comments, a fair comparison with the deep learning one, which looks at different timbres basically and then models different timbres. So basically, a fair comparison would mean that the NMF will store many more timbre bases, for a single note, many more viewpoints for a single note.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't. I was. This is a good point. I was. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Then more questions about the multi-channel scenario. So as you mentioned in your current model, the assumption is that the signals at different mics are uncorrelated, and therefore you can leverage multi-channel information in a useful way only if the target source is dominating at multiple mics. In situations when it is not, indeed you want to model correlation in order to leverage even poor SNRs could help improving if you model correlation and phase differences and so on. So you mentioned our phase model for that. So since you know about it, I was going to ask, do you think it would be, I mean, it was developed mostly for scenarios with mics which are close together, fewer sources and so on. So do you think it's still applicable in this orchestral scenario, or how should it be modified to be better applicable?
Yeah, my only concern that is this expectation maximization that you have in this framework is very computationally intensive. Mm-hmm. So you don't have 4 sources in a stereo. You have 10 channels and 10 sources maybe. So probably you need a smaller time window in which you estimate your R matrix, basically. Mm-hmm. And yeah, this is the first thing that you have to do, because you have to think of the computational
yes, that's a good point, yes.
Constraints on this. Maybe if you know already the position of the microphones, and we had the position of the sources from the sound engineer, mm-hmm. and in a real life scenario, you assume that you might have that. Yeah. So I don't know, maybe we can restrict this model to somehow initialize the R matrix, mm-hmm. not with the identity matrix, but with some sort of way that you estimate that the sources are distributed in a certain manner. Yeah. Learn this from the position. Yes. So yeah, I started to work with this framework, but I didn't have time to basically extend it it would be interesting to integrate somehow this expectation maximization with the deep learning. Mm-hmm. Now it's not possible because this requires complex numbers. Yes. So I think TensorFlow only has these complex numbers, but that would be interesting to do. Okay. So by the way, in the multi-channel deep learning results you showed, I didn't understand exactly how you applied it to multi-channel data. Okay. So basically it's similar to what I do here. Uh-huh. So here you have 4 sources as input. If you have 2 channels, you have 8 okay. As input. Okay. But this assumes that you know already how many channels you have and how many sources you have.
Okay.
This is the big limitation of this method in comparison to other methods as Ulrich. Yeah, because he estimates each short separately, and then he uses the phase invariant model to project this to the separate channel. So
okay.
if we could somehow integrate all of this with the phase invariant model, that would be a good way.
Okay. So another issue, of course, with the model is that here, because your mics are so far apart, delays will be longer than 1 frame. So you also need to account for that. Otherwise, it won't work.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yes, maybe one kind of conclusion about alignment. In the end, by looking at all the results, I found that better alignment of the score doesn't help so much. So it could be, well, in a sense, it's disappointing because you did all this work and the CNN manages to overcome bad alignment. But of course, if it's true, it's a good news in the sense that existing alignment techniques are good enough. So do you agree with this conclusion, or do you think?
This is highly dependent on your test scenario. So I was contradicted on this aspect by Meinl Müller. So, but he was only testing these methods with piano recordings. So I don't know. I mean, what I did was testing it with simpler scenarios like the Bach 10, and then moving to the more complex scenario as the orchestra. And you see that it works worse in more complex things, where in more complex scenario. Then you cannot say if the refinement really works well, and which of the factors are decreasing your performance. So in this case, you need to better analyze this. If it's the refinement that doesn't work, or it's other factor. I don't know. We had like onsets are easy to detect, but in this case of orchestral music, you have a lot of tail. Yes. So I mean, we consider it at 0.9 the RT60 time, 0.9 seconds. And this already gives a lot of, if you have a note which is only 200 milliseconds, 0.2 seconds, you enlarge it up to 1 second, and this captures a lot of interference from other instruments.
Yeah.
So, but you don't want to cut it as much because you want to somehow to preserve the reverb. It's annoying if you don't have this reverb when you listen to this recording.
Yes.
So yeah, my conclusion is that the reverberation makes this refinement a lot more difficult to work with.
Yes. Another question relating to this is, well, similar to what Xavier said. I was wondering if the BSS eval metrics are appropriate to evaluate this, because they are energy metrics. So the error will be dominated by the largest error somewhere, and if there's a smaller error elsewhere, it will probably not appear much in the metrics. And this is quite bad for the tail, because the tail has lower energy, so if you make mistakes there, there's a chance it won't affect much the metric values. So I was wondering if the findings regarding alignment were supported by what you heard when you listened to the results.
Yeah. So let me think for one moment. Yeah, by listening to it, I think it was penalizing a lot the fact that you somehow accounted for some errors in the alignment, and you said that the note is going to be start here and end here, but it was starting somehow elsewhere.
Okay.
And basically, this way of you capture other sources in this part. So this was penalizing a lot of places where the instrument was not sounding, but it was supposed to sound, and places where the instrument was separated, but it was not supposed to be separated. You know.
Mm-hmm. So by penalizing, you mean it sounded worse than the metrics would tell you?
Yeah.
Okay.
So these were penalized heavily. Like, let's say you say your note starts here, but it really starts earlier. If you say that it starts here, it gets a lot of interference from other instruments. This is penalized heavily by the metrics in source separation.
In the other way around, your method, which finds the boundaries, probably sounded better than the metrics.
Yeah, well, I mean, I should have done the perceptual evaluation. So this method was developed just by listening to the various.
Yes.
So this was what I was doing at the beginning. I was looking at spectrograms and listening to it, and I had various initialization of the NMF, and I listened to how they sound, and I realized if you focus more on the note, you have better quality.
Better. Okay. So you could, by the way, so Maximo mentioned the piece metrics. But I would even advise that you run a listening test, and you don't need. I mean, if
maybe a Mushra test or something.
Yeah, something like that. You don't need so many people, and it's not so long, and it could really be more convincing than those metrics. And yes, so of course I have a few questions on the DNN part as well. So maybe, well. Provocative question to start with. I feel, looking at your work or other works in the literature, that essentially data augmentation fails. Nobody really found a way of augmenting data that significantly, so maybe statistically, yes, it's significant, but it's just a few tenths of dB. It's not a huge improvement compared to no data augmentation. So what is the issue here? Is it just that we haven't found a good way of augmenting data yet, or what else is missing to further improve performance?
So this leads me, I can give you an example which can explain, go straight to the point. So style transfer in image. You're able to do this very easily now with deep learning techniques. You know what a style is. You can recreate an image of a photo that you have with the style of a Van Gogh painting, no? But try to do this with sound. What is style in sound? So style is captured by long-term dependencies, like I mentioned these 4 factors. So how can you capture this in images straight away? It's what you see there. It's the pixel that you model. They already capture the style information. But style information I mean, it also depends on the representation that you use. These spectrograms, are they really what we look at is the style of the piece? If we have transformation of this so-called images, are these the audio signal that we listen? They are not. They're somehow an image that it's the transformation of your audio signal. Mm-hmm. So I think it's also related to this. You know, I try to somehow simulate the factors that you encountered in the real life. However, this. I mean, I think in audio, this augmentation was never improving a lot.
It's never very successful, Yeah.
And compared to image, where you have the spatial transformation, the rotation, and all the techniques which really can improve a lot. Yes. Maybe now with I think the latest method, with the generative method, they're very tricky to train and very difficult to explain what you learn there, and very sensitive, which if you change a parameter doesn't work and you don't know why. But again, I think it's a problem of context. You know, the style in music has a different meaning than the style in images. So we are one step behind the image processing, and we borrow from their approaches. We blindly use their approaches somehow, but maybe the problem is it's not well posed.
So it means our data augmentation techniques are too simple, and we need one step better model what music really is. Okay, yes, that's a valid statement. So on the same line, if you look in the work of the guys at Sony, when they augmented data, they mixed together tracks which were completely different. They didn't keep tracks from the same song, which you did. So I wonder, while looking at those works together now, what would you advise? Should we stick to the same song or the same tracks that were meant to be mixed together or not?
I think they mixed a wide range of tracks. So they have, I mean, I'm dealing mostly with harmonic tracks. So for me, this consonance is important.
Yes.
So I was not also claiming at modeling a very general context. So they claim they have a universal source separation method. My method is targeted at a set of scores, not one score, but a set of scores. I think somehow this could also make it more robust. So if you have certain things which are not realistic, this somehow pulls your loss function in a direction that you don't overfit on the training data. Yes. So, I mean, I'm just speculating here. I'm not sure that if this is the case or not. Yeah. So I think it works that well. I mean, it's a complex method. They iterate it as well over and over again. I was advised by one of the reviewers in Izmir to iterate this method, to basically to have this input and just go again. Yeah. I think this also can also improve. We haven't tried that. Yes.
Okay. Well, I think I have one last question regarding the perspectives. In the thesis, I found so the list of perspectives is interesting, but it's mostly applied. And of course, there is lots of work to be done on the applied side. Do you think there are more fundamental methodological challenges still remaining in source separation? I don't really. You don't get the question. Okay. Yeah. Well, let me pick examples from the list of challenges. So very quickly, so one challenge is applying it to essentially other types of music, testing it on more data. Another one is trying different types of neural nets, but mostly taken from the image processing field. And another one is applying it to different fields. So this is applied research, and again, it's fine. But do you think even though deep learning is quite applied science today, do you think there are more fundamental challenges that still need to be tackled?
Yeah, we don't know really what is learning the model. Yes. So basically, in deep learning, the application field advances faster than the theoretical field now. So I know someone said that I don't know. We don't have a math proof that why this works very well. I think Sebastian, my lab, tried to explain some of this to formulate it under a wavelet theory, like these filters are similar to the wavelets. Yes. So what this doesn't explain. I mean, it explains maybe if you have a fully deterministic model. But if you have these nonlinearities, if you stack also with the generative ones, it still got even more complex than this. So what we lack now is a theory that
to explain deep learning.
To explain why this works and what.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So thank you very much. That's all on my side. I think no more questions for the two of you. Is there someone in the audience with a PhD that wants to ask a question? No? The supervisor, maybe? No. Okay, so that's finished for now. We will meet privately to discuss.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.